Hi everyone, welcome back to the Faster262 YouTube channel. It's been a little bit more than a week since completing the Newport Marathon. I want to go ahead and give you my personal review of the course itself and the experience that surrounded the Newport Marathon and my performance on the course. Now, before we go into the details, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button on the bottom hand of the screen. That would just help generate a little bit of interest, and it will just spur the algorithm so that way other people can be able to view this as well. So let's go ahead and get to it. But once I got to the expo, I noticed that it's very sparse. So essentially I didn't spend too much time at the expo per se. It was simply just to take my picture, go in line and pick up my bib and any goodie bags that they were able to provide. So essentially traveling to the expo is at the same location at the race start and finish. So that allowed me to have a very good idea of traveling essentially the first mile of the course and to essentially just get an idea of the first inkling of elevation gain. Because before traveling to Rhode Island, the only thing that I had available to me was on the course website and seeing what the course map was and the elevation chart. So by looking at the chart, the course is moderately hilly, but it allowed me to have some idea, some strategy involved in tackling this course appropriately without burning myself out too much. Essentially, I would look at it as the first 4 miles. I would want to kind of test out, slow myself down a little bit with the hills, ease myself over until mile 8, and then essentially tackle the second segment of hills, which essentially be tackling from essentially mile 9 to mile 15. And then essentially would be the part where I knew I had to grind, because at that point legs are getting heavier. And so those later miles, essentially mile 18 and a half to mile 23, that's really right where I had to grind. Again, if you didn't know already, I'm a runner from Florida. The hill that is in my area is not very hilly compared to courses that I recently have been traveling to. To be honest with you, one of the lower elevated hills on the Newport course is pretty much the equivalent of one of my highest hills here locally. So as far as training is concerned, I definitely made sure I put in a little bit of strength training at the gym just to make sure I had just a little bit of strength in my legs to tackle on those larger hills. At the start, the Newport Marathon had asked all the runners to create a honor code. The bibs were not in any particular order like you would see at Boston, where a lower numbered bib means a faster runner. So I decided to put myself just slightly behind the 3:45 pace group and definitely a couple of groups in front of the 4-hour pace group. So I feel as though that was my range that I was shooting for. For the first 2-3 miles, I really want to just go ahead and just ride the wave, essentially just whatever group I'm in. If it's a group that is surrounding me that's going a little bit slower, I'd go with that. If it's going a little bit faster, then I would take that into account. But that first hill is definitely higher than the one I train here at home. I did not look at my watch per se as far as what pace I was going at. I'm going to pull up my Strava here just real quick just so I can have an idea of what pace I was going at for that first uphill. I know that there was only a very few hills that once you get over the cusp and you were essentially going downhill at that point, where I actually allowed myself to lean forward and let gravity take its course. And I felt as though I was kind of flying a little bit. My intention was that I did not want to go anywhere faster than goal pace. The first mile, I hit that at 8:51 pace, which is just right in line with where I wanted to be. The second mile involved the downhill towards downtown Newport, essentially just wrapping a left-hand turn around Newport Harbor and essentially making your way towards the more rural area of Newport. Looking at my mile 2 split, it was an 8:08, which I think that was the fastest mile I ran for that day. As far as was that intended, of course not. It was essentially a 72-foot elevation for the first mile, a 75-foot elevation drop in the second mile. So at the time of the race, I knew that essentially would be essentially a net zero for the first 2 miles. So I kind of decided, well, whatever my pace was for mile 1, whatever my pace was for mile 2, take the average, take the middle of that, and see where I was as far as gauging, should I back off or should I start speeding up a little bit. So because that average was roughly about 8:35 pace, slightly a little hot, but it's okay as long as it wasn't too hot. And then once we get essentially to mile 4, 5, and 6, that's where we get to the first set of amazing views that you would get of Newport. So at that point, mile 5.5 is where we officially get onto Ocean Avenue, where essentially we make our way along a potentially 4-5 mile trek along the road that would essentially be parallel to the ocean views. So it was amazing. For the most part, as I would expect, that Ocean Avenue was primarily flat. I'll probably say there's undulating hills there, but nothing for me to be too concerned. It wasn't a very large hill like a bridge. So it's essentially a flat area course there. So I did not mind that too much. I wanted to make sure I kept myself in the zone, kept myself steady. I kept checking myself over and over. So for those particular miles, I was hitting pretty much 8:35 pace, 8:30, 8:38, 8:41. So I was, again, just in the zone, making sure I kept a very steady pace, not to chase anybody, because that's the one thing I definitely did keep in mind, that because this course is pretty much like a gigantic figure 8, the first half of the race would involve all runners, half marathoners and marathoners. So there would be runners that I would expect that I would be naturally behind, or those that would be chasing me, or those that would just naturally get in front of me. And I tried my best to just remove all kind of cheetah instinct and start chasing them, realizing that very likely if they had a brown bib, that essentially meant they were a half marathoner. So I didn't want to just waste all that energy and just go for the kick. So I wanted to make sure I left it alone, kind of kept to my watch, and just made sure I maintained proper pace. So starting from mile 10, it was a different kind of scenic route where you'd be seeing essentially the mile or 2 miles worth of mansions left and right. So one thing that I've learned from my research of how far this town has gone back, and I think it goes as far back as 1639. So there was a lot of houses, architecture, homes that had been converted into museums, and so they decided to use the course alongside those mansions, and so that way you'd be able to get a wonderful view on both sides of the street wherever you were running on. So I was able to get a good look at the Breakers, Marlborough House. I think it was called the Bell Courts of Newport. A lot of houses. I mean, it was beautiful. But then as soon as those miles ended, we pretty much wrapped ourselves right back onto the road that we started our first hill on, and make our way halfway point back to Easton Beach. So once we get to the halfway point, of course, we saw the sign that allowed us to split between the half marathoners to finish. Once we passed by the halfway point, one thing I definitely noticed is that even though it's not a pure or perfect figure 8, there was a hill that we'd be going down, but then eventually coming back up on mile 15, we would have a nice downhill drop. But because of the course, it has some kind of loop around feature to it, and then essentially gets back onto the same course to get back to the finish line, that mile 15 mark, I would return on mile 24. It felt good on the way down, not so good on the way back up. So once I got to miles 16, 17, and 18, there is, again, even much more of a nature portion of the course, but at that point it starts to get a little bit sparse again. The areas for spectators to cheer you on also were kind of spotty. So once I got to mile 18, 18 and a half, that's where I knew it was the largest hill on the course. Thankfully it wasn't steep, it was a very gradual hill, but it just takes a very long time to get to the top. So roughly, again, not using any specific measurement whatsoever, but just kind of just a baseline idea, this hill was approximately about 3/4 long, and it went about 100 feet up in elevation. So just kind of doing that little bit of calculation, it was roughly about a 2.6% grade. So again, that kind of gives you a really good idea of how long you have to maintain that kind of elevation on a treadmill. So once you hit that, then you essentially be tackling more moderate hills for the next 4 to 5 miles when your legs is already hitting fatigue. Any of you follow me on Strava, you might have noticed that there was a little bit of a sharp cliff dive when it comes to my data. There was no error whatsoever when it comes to my watch. I completely stopped. My hamstring completely pulled on 18 and a half, maybe mile 19. Once I got to the top of it, my right hamstring just could not give any more. Thankfully, it pulled right in front of a wonderful family that allowed me to get some water. That just kind of gave me a really good pep talk while I was trying to stretching out that hamstring just over and over and over again. And then once I got hydrated and I felt as though I kind of just swung my leg a little bit back and forth just to kind of give it some motion, I kept going. That was my only part of the race where I completely stopped just for the sake of my hamstring. But other than that, I was able to just kind of really slow it down for the uphills, knowing that hamstring can tense up in any moment, but then just take advantage of every downhill possible. Just make sure to keep my stride short and just let gravity let me fly. Miles 21, 22, 23, that allowed me just kind of just keep on going. I decided to tell myself like, okay, I'm tired of being hurt right now. I can do it, I can do it, I can believe. So at that point, once we were getting to miles 23, 24, I was feeling it. I knew, okay, 3 miles to go. I have done this many, many times in training. I have done a 3-mile easy run so many times. I've done a 5K jog. I've done so many tempo runs that were 4 or 5 miles in length that felt like it didn't take much time to complete. So I just kept visualizing all those runs I've had in training and just told myself, go ahead and do that. Imagine yourself doing those runs, and then before you know it, you'd be getting close to the finish line and you can finally relax. And that's all I kept on visualizing, was just get one more training run out of me and just finish it. Once I climbed up mile 24, for those last 2 miles, I started quickening my pace. It was all downhill from there. My quads felt good, they felt strong, and they did not give me any indication, any feeling whatsoever that they were going to get about on me. I knew I had the confidence to just go ahead and just fly towards the finish. I really wanted to just take advantage and just go and go and go. So before I knew, there was a finisher chute of runners left and right. I was so pumped and excited. I knew that it was just around the corner, and when I saw that finish line, I just went after it.
Let's go, baby!
I was able to finish that course in 3:54:41, which allowed me to get another PR, which is amazing. Before the race started, I believe there was about 892 marathoners that were registered for the race. 608 finished. And so out of that, I finished in 119th place, which is not bad because most marathons that I participate in, I tend to be in the top 33 to top 25%. But this time I think I was in the top 20%, so I was pretty excited about that. As far as age groups, which it's always good to kind of compare with other people that are of your gender and age. So there was 47 men of my age group between 35 and 39, and I got 10th place, so it's not too bad there. The one thing I really wanted to just have a really good idea as far as what were my overall half marathon splits. I really wanted to know if I was roughly even pace, and I knew I was a little bit slower on the second half because of the much higher hills, but my pace differences were an hour 54 on the first half, which is about an 8:43 pace. And then on the back half, it was essentially an exact 2 hours, which is a 9:12 pace. Almost evenly split there just by a difference of 6 minutes. I can't really knock myself out too much for that because, again, it wasn't a flat course. There were more hills on the back half. So I can give myself that leeway of not being too hard on myself as far as the goal of evenly or negative splitting. I did have a positive split there. So it wasn't too bad. I really enjoyed the race. It was amazing. The weather was awesome. Unfortunately, I heard a lot of stories that the weather in Chicago was not conducive to marathon running. I think it was as high as 80 degrees, which that is very, very warm. Over in Newport, it was 56 that morning, and I think the humidity was a little bit up there, but not as high as Florida. I was prepared for that. So it was exactly what I would have wanted when it comes to a marathon. It was great. And so this marathon here is just one of the two remaining marathons I have left for this year. And so with this now in the books, I have another marathon which would be about 2.5 weeks away. And so I will be really excited to get the ball rolling and show you the experiences I have when I travel to New York City and run the New York City Marathon, which will be my second major. So it'll be really exciting. It'll be state number 8, major number 2, and I'm not really sure just yet if I plan to go all out on it. I think I should, because my PR streak is on the line, but right now I'm not really focusing on getting back on the road and running just yet. I really want to just make sure I get to New York City healthy. So if you are joining me for New York City, let me know. If you are an international runner, I share my sympathies with you. I understand with the travel ban not being lifted until the day after, that provides pretty much a big barrier for you to travel to New York City and run the race. So I do appreciate that the race organizers like NYRR allow you a free deferral to the next race, to the next year's race in 2022. So take care, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this personal recap of how I performed on race day. It was a blast, knowing with New York City having its own hills with bridges and all that. So that'll be fun to enjoy. I might have to use Newport as my visualization to help me get through all those hills of New York City. But other than that, I will be glad to share that with all of you, from travel to expo to race. Take care, everyone. Dream big, continue putting in the work, even if it's in recovery, that's still work, and make the impossible possible. Take care, everyone, and see you on the next one.